Welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Sollman, and along with Mark Jewell, my co-host and the founder and CEO of Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day.
Hey everybody, so for this week's episode, we are going to do something a little bit different. So just due to some scheduling things and people being busy, I'm actually going to fly solo today in this conversation. So couple of things. One, I am sitting outside on a beautiful mid-Michigan summer day, and so there's a good chance that you might hear some birds, or I live near an airport, so I'll try and weed out the airplane noises if any happen to come up. So just kind of be aware of that. I don't have my fancy microphone today, so hopefully there's not too much background noise. But then the other thing is, where I'm thinking I'm going to go is a little bit of a grab bag. So I've got 3 smaller subjects that have been coming up a lot in my conversations with folks, in coaching calls, those sorts of things. And so I'm just going to sort of do a little mix and match, a little bit of everything. And hopefully, 1 or 2 of them, or maybe all 3, might resonate with you as you're listening to this. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So the first concept that I want to talk about is this idea of simple versus easy. Now, if you follow Mark Jewell Speaking and Training on Instagram, and if you don't, it's MJ_training. I posted something recently where we said, the actions that get us out of survival mode are often pretty simple, right? They're not easy, but they are simple. This is a concept that I know is not new to us, right? I think I've heard some other speakers say it as well. But I just want to dig into that because it's something that comes up a lot when people are like, okay, I want to get out of survival mode, but how the heck do I do it? So the first thing I want to do is kind of dig into those terms, right? Simple and easy. I think a lot of times people confuse those two as being one and the same. And the reality is they are not. Simple is all about complexity. How hard is it? How complicated is it? How many moving parts does it have, right? So when you think of the word simple, think of how complex is it. On the opposite side is easy. And to me, ease is all about what barriers are in the way, right? So no matter how complex or simple something is, the reality is that there are still barriers that get in the way of us doing things. So let's talk through some examples. Let's say, man, I really want to get in shape and I just don't know how. Okay, so maybe you decide where your survival mode is in your health and fitness. Right? So I often say, man, I just don't know how. The reality is the actions are pretty simple, right? I recently heard somebody say, if you want to be in shape, just look at what people who are in shape do and do that, right? The steps are go to the gym or, do workouts, eat fairly well, stay active, move your body, don't sit around all the time, get good sleep. It's not rocket science. But it also isn't necessarily easy either, right? So, we have limiting beliefs. Maybe I don't actually feel like I deserve to have good health. Or maybe I have a story in my head that's saying, oh, there's no gym near me, so I guess I can't get in shape. Or, oh, I don't have the money to hire a personal trainer, so I guess it's just not available to me. Or, you know what, I hate eating healthy, so I am not eating salads, right? Like, we have those stories. Those are the barriers. So even though the steps are simple, go to the gym, eat less junk food, hire a trainer, get sleep, right? Those are simple. They're not complex. They're not rocket science. They're also not easy, because your own limiting beliefs, your own story, maybe straight up laziness sometimes, right? It gets in the way. It creates a barrier. Let's look at another example, right? So let's say, I'm really feeling like I'm just surviving in my marriage or in maybe a relationship with my kids. We'll stick to the marriage example just for the sake of talking it through. The steps are not complex. They are simple. Take your spouse out on a date, hire a babysitter, send the kids to your parents, sit and listen to your spouse talk about their day for 15, 20 minutes. Show some affection, give them a hug. Really listen, not just hear, but truly listen. Those things aren't complex. You could make a decision today to choose to go out on date night tomorrow, and if it's important to you, you'll make it happen. But in many cases, we make it not easy. Well, I can't go out on a date because we're just too busy. We've got too many activities going on. Or, I can't hire a babysitter because nobody's available on short notice. I can't send the kids to my parents because I don't want to impose on them. I can't sit here and listen to my spouse because I really don't care about what they have to say. Right? I don't show affection because it's uncomfortable for me. Right? These are the stories we tell. These are the limiting beliefs we put in place to make something that's actually very simple, go out on a date, so much harder than it has to be. One other example that I want to use just for this topic is, a lot of people are saying, how do I get more control of my time? Right? Once again, simple steps. Say no. Use a calendar. Right? Those aren't hard. They're not complex. But they're not easy either, right? Because we feel guilty that we're going to let somebody down. Or it might mean not doing something we'd really love to do because we know there's something more important that we should be doing. Right? It's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. So, I get it. Right? Every single one of us deals with these types of situations. And so what I want to offer to you is a few tools or a few resources to look into or a few questions to ask yourself. Okay? So the first one on this topic that I really would encourage folks to look into, it has been a game changer for me, and it's somebody that I'm really just liking reading and watching and listening to lately, is I want you to check out the 5-second rule by Mel Robbins. So I will include a link to a video that she does an interview on this subject that's really great. I'll also include the link to her book in case you want to dig into that a little deeper. But it's all based on this idea that most of the time what happens is we know what we should do and we talk ourselves out of it, right? We overthink. And so that overthinking comes every time we hesitate, right? So if I drive by the gym, my first thought is, I should stop in there and go for a workout, but I hesitate. And in that moment of hesitation, the brain often interprets that as we're hesitating because it's a situation we shouldn't be in. And so it then starts to do everything to talk us out of it. I don't have time to go to the gym, or I didn't pack the right clothes, or I don't know what workout I would do, or I hate to work out in front of other people, so I really shouldn't do it, right? We start that conversation in our head. And so what the 5-second rule is in that moment where you say, man, I should really go to the gym, you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move, right? And when you say move, whether it's in your head or out loud, I actually recommend doing this out loud. It works really well. You are interrupting that pattern of hesitation where your brain starts to talk you out of it. The example Mel uses that I think all of us can probably relate to at some point is getting out of bed in the morning and hitting the snooze button. Right? So instead of hitting the snooze button when that alarm goes off, you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move. And if you read the book, she goes into the science of all of this. But it is very funny how something so simple can be such a huge pattern interrupter. Right? Same thing goes, man, I know I have to have this hard conversation with somebody and I'm just really afraid to do it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, make the meeting notice. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, walk to their cubicle, right? The 5-second rule is designed to get you out of thinking and into moving, into taking action. Okay, so that's one resource on this topic where we're looking at simple versus easy and knowing what we should do, but just not knowing how to do it, is the 5-second rule to interrupt overthinking, to interrupt talking yourself out of doing the very simple things. Okay, so that's one piece. Another thing that I would challenge you, and it's kind of along the same lines as the 5-second rule, but is to ask yourself, what can I do right this minute that would move me forward? Okay. So let's say, let's go back to the improving your marriage example, right? So let's say, I know I'm in survival mode and I want to get out of it. What is something I can do right now? I can send him or her a text telling them I'm thinking about them. Right? I can call the babysitter right now. I can make the reservation at the restaurant right now. Defaulting to action, again, getting yourself out of thinking and into moving. I believe it's Tony Robbins, maybe it's somebody else, don't quote me there, but I believe it's Tony Robbins who says, when you're in your head, you're dead. Okay? As long as you are thinking, everything will be worst case scenario. Everything will default to what's not possible. Everything will seem harder than it actually is. So the trick is getting yourself out of your head and into motion, into action. So there's the 5-second rule, and there's what is it that I can do right now, no matter how big or small, that will be motion. Okay? And the final thing that I have recommended to folks that I think is a good exercise, a good reflection question, is when you get yourself stuck in that, I want to do this thing, but I don't know how, right? So, for example, I keep going back to the fitness examples because they're so easy, but there's parallels in all sorts of places. But let's say I want to get in shape, but I don't know how. Well, let's make a list, okay? Okay, I could get a gym membership. I can go on YouTube and get a bunch of free workouts. I can go on Pinterest and get a bunch of free workouts. I can find an accountability buddy or see if one of my family members wants to work out with me. I can hire a personal trainer. I can go to the grocery store and buy things to make salads and skip past the chips. I can get up tomorrow morning and go for a 30-minute walk or a 30-minute run. I can buy a kettlebell or a set of free weights for myself to have at home. I can schedule myself a trip to the studio for a yoga class. I can do all sorts of things. I just came up with a list of flipping 10 to 12 things that you can do. Right? Don't tell me you don't know how. Now again, it's not easy, right? Once I have that list, then I actually have to do something with it. But you know how. The answers are in your head. You may be refusing to acknowledge them, but they're there. The solutions are within you if you take time to acknowledge them. I'll often call this with people the list of possibilities. What's possible? Right? Now notice I don't call it the list of feasibilities. Right? I don't care if it's feasible or if it's realistic. I just want to know today, right in this moment, if you took all of the barriers off, if you took all of the things that are stopping you away, what could you do? And the reality is 9 times out of 10, there is a whole list of things you could do if only you would allow yourself to acknowledge that they're possible. And then you get to do the 5-second rule. Then you get to default to action. Well, right now I could put my workout clothes out. right now I could drive to the gym. Right now I could turn the TV off and go for a walk, right? All of these things loop together. But the reality is, in all of these cases, we make it so much harder than it has to be. Keep reminding yourself. These things are very simple. The trick is getting over the barriers that are making it harder than it has to be. Okay, so that's grab bag number one. That topic has come up a lot in coaching clients or coaching calls and a lot in live training workshops recently. And so I definitely think there's probably something there for all of us to dig into, to think about a little bit. Another topic that's been coming up, and I think this is one of those evergreen topics for whatever reason, but it is the topic of work-life balance, right? We've all bought into this myth that there's this mythical state of balance that we're all after, and sometimes you probably have heard us refer to it. We don't believe in balance; that it's more of a work-life blend. But a new kind of take on this concept that has really been hitting home for me, and that I actually started talking with some folks about earlier this week, is one that I heard. I do believe I heard it from Mel Robbins, same person of the 5-second rule. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's where this came from. I was joking with Mark the other day that I'm not like Wade, who can just like store all of these things in my brain. I don't remember things super well, but I think this was from Mel Robbins, where she talked about the fact that there is no work-life balance. What there is boundaries and priorities. Okay? So when you are feeling like, man, my work-life balance is just super out of whack, there's a good chance that A, you have not set boundaries around your time, or you set boundaries but aren't respecting them, or B, you haven't prioritized, right? You're just trying to do everything, or you say you have priorities, but your actions are not aligning to back up those priorities. Okay, so let me share some examples. I was working with a client once who just, felt like their work-life balance was just way out of whack. It was impacting their marriage. They didn't know what to do. And I said, where are your priorities? Oh, my family is my number one priority, right? They are the thing that matters the most. And I said, okay, you're telling me that you've prioritized family, but you're not showing me that you've prioritized family, because you still go back to work at night. You still let work take over your weekends over and over again, right? This isn't just a one-time thing where things are busy, right? This is a pattern where you're saying one thing and doing another. That was a wake-up moment for that individual. For the better, I think, right? Because sometimes we don't even realize, right? We're so overtaken with, the guilt of letting someone down, or feeling as though we have to do certain things. But that's one of these cases where boundaries and priorities were being said, but not being done. Okay. I want you guys to remember this concept, right? If you imagine two horizontal lines, right? One horizontal line is expectations. One horizontal line is reality. The closer those lines are to each other, the happier you will be. The farther those lines are apart, the more stressed you will be, right? So if the expectation is that my family is my priority, but that's not the reality, I'm going to feel that disconnect, right? The chances are I'm going to feel that disconnect before I realize why the disconnect is happening. Okay. Boundaries are the same deal. Right? Now, in a lot of times, not going to lie, we have stories in our head that say we can't set boundaries. Right? We work with a lot of sales folks who fear, right? Like, if I don't pick up this phone call from a customer on the weekend, they're going to go to somebody else and I'm not going to be able to get that business back. Right? Or, we say if I don't draw boundaries that Thursday night is date night, or Or if I draw boundaries, I'm going to let my kids down for some reason, or I'm going to let somebody else down for some reason, right? We sometimes think we can't set those boundaries. But here's kind of the cool thing, is when you start prioritizing, when you start drawing boundaries, and here's the trick, I want everybody to get out their theoretical highlighter and highlight this. When we prioritize, when we set boundaries, and when we clearly communicate those boundaries to others, really cool things start happening. So maybe in the short term, people are disappointed or people are frustrated because now they got to go get that help from somebody else. But if I protect my time, the people around me start to protect it as well. Right? So let's say that you're in a job that has lots of after hours work, right? So I work with a lot of ag teachers, and I know this, my dad was an ag teacher, my sister's an ag teacher. I know this to be the case, that, there's a lot of things that go on in the evenings and on weekends. So when you say, for example, I don't do any after school activities on Thursday nights from 6 to 8, because that is my time with my spouse. That's date night. Now, people might be frustrated in the short term, but eventually, if you communicate clearly and if you respect your own boundaries, if you stick to them, unless it's an exception that you really, really stand by, but if in 9 out of 10 cases you set the boundary, you communicate the boundary, you follow the boundary, the people around you, when somebody asks to schedule things on a Thursday, they'll say, oh no, he's not available on Thursday. Or we can schedule it on Thursday, but he won't be there. So just be aware of that, right? You'll start to see the people in your life help you out. It's an amazing thing, but our brain tells this story that that's not going to happen, that people will be so angry with us. And that's not the truth most of the time. Okay? And I want to say something about boundaries and priorities. This is not to say that you won't have to make some hard decisions, right? This is not to say that you might have to give up one thing to gain another. In that situation, you just get to ask yourself, is what I'm gaining worth what I'm giving up? And if it is, then you get to set the boundary, then you get to set the priority, and you get to communicate that to the people around you. Again, just to reference the first point, these things are very simple. They're not always easy, but they're very simple. But with most things in life, when it's really important, you will figure out a way to do it. What I would just encourage folks to do is don't wait until the pain is so bad to set those boundaries and set those priorities. Don't wait until your marriage is falling apart to protect time for you and your spouse. Don't wait until your body's falling apart to protect time to take care of it. Set the boundaries, set the priorities now to live into the story that you want to live. That's not to say you can't change those boundaries and priorities later, but just be careful about waiting for too long. The final concept I want to dig into is that we have to own our story before we can change our story. It was funny, recently, earlier this week actually, Mark and I were out teaching this concept of the story framework. And if by chance you're new to this podcast, that is the idea that we all create stories about ourselves, about the people around us, about the situations we're in, based on a pretty consistent pattern, right? There's a trigger that creates a thought, that creates a feeling, which drives us to take action. And depending on the action we take, we get some sort of result, good or bad, right? Part of that concept is that part of your story is built on what we refer to as your hardwiring. It's all of the experiences in life, all of the situations you've been in life, many of them when you were very, very young, that drive those stories, right? The story you have about how a marriage should work is highly influenced by the examples of marriages you saw growing up. The story you have about spirituality or religion is highly influenced by the experiences you had growing up in an early life. The story you have about health and fitness and how important that should be is highly influenced by what you saw or what you experienced growing up. And this shows up in lots of different cases. And so someone asked us, as we were teaching this framework, what is the point of telling us about the 95%? What is the point of teaching us about the hardwiring? And just in case I didn't say it, right, 95% of that hardwiring is often in there before you ever turn 10 years old. And so he was saying, why do you even teach us this, right? If we are hardwired into certain beliefs, certain opinions, certain stories, before we're even 10 years old, why do you even bother teaching us that? I mean, if we can't change it, why does it matter? And we've been asked this question before, and where I always go to is this concept that I was once taught by a veterinarian in a previous job, but which I think applies to humans as well. And it's this idea of root cause analysis, right? So when we talk about physical health, for instance, if you go into the doctor and you've got a cough, the doctor could go tackle that cough, right? He might write you some antibiotics. He might tell you, oh, it's just a cold, go home. She might, send you in for more tests, whatever. But they're treating the cough. The funny part is, if we don't try to get to the root cause of why you have that cough in the first place, they may be treating the wrong thing, right? They could be treating you for pneumonia when you've just got a cold. They could be treating you for a cold when it's something much, much more serious. In all situations, we have to get to the root cause. And that's what I think is so important about understanding your 95%, what is so important about understanding your hardwiring, what is so important about understanding your story, your experiences growing up, your development, especially when you were really young, is that there is a good chance that right now as an adult, you're only tackling symptoms. Let me give you some examples. So, for example, let's say that you are in a marriage where one of the spouses has a really hard time showing affection, right? You don't hold hands, you don't hug, you don't do whatever. Now, you could grab that spouse's hand, you could give them a hug, but it's probably not a long-term solution. Especially not when, if you dig into the story, if you dig into the 95% into the hardwiring, you realize that maybe one of those spouses, especially in those formative years as a child, maybe they had parents who fought all the time. Or maybe, this is worst case scenario, but maybe there was abuse in their background. Or maybe they just had parents who also never showed each other affection. And so they have no mental model for what affection in a relationship should look like. Until you know that hardwiring, until you know that 95% that was developed in their youth, until you know the story they're living, you can't change it. Right? Let's look at another example. Maybe it's finances. Maybe you're just like, oh my gosh, I never am able to save my money. Right? So maybe you try and tackle the symptoms, right? So you go out, maybe you create a savings account, or maybe you cut up all your credit cards, or maybe you try to make more money, right? But the fact is, like, it keeps coming back. You keep spending all the money that you're trying to put away or trying to keep yourself from spending. You keep finding a way around it. Until maybe you go back into that 95%, into that hardwiring, and you say, wow, growing up, I saw adults who never saved money. Or, looking back, I was never taught how to save money. Or maybe I was never taught or shown the importance of saving money. And so now as an adult, I don't have a reference that I can pull from. And so I default into old behaviors. Maybe I don't feel worthy of saving money because maybe I have a mental model of the world where I see wealth as a bad thing, right? Who knows? But before you can find a solution to this thing you're frustrated by, until you understand why you have the problem in the first place, you can't come up with that solution. Another one that comes up a lot for our clients is a fear of confrontation, right? They say, oh my gosh, I'm so scared to have hard conversations, or I'm just so afraid of confrontation. And so I avoid it. And so all day I could tell them, well, here's how you could structure that conversation, or here's some techniques for talking to this person, or here's how you could think of this person. But if we don't get in touch with why that person's afraid of confrontation in the first place, they're never going to be able to initiate the conversation, right? So maybe they grew up seeing parents who always avoided hard topics. Or maybe they had parents who yelled a lot and the only way to feel safe was to hide. Until they can come to terms with where that fear of confrontation comes from, you'll never be able to work through it. You have to go to the root cause before you can tackle the symptoms in the most appropriate manner. So, again, we have to know our own story before we can even own that story, before we can change the story. We've got to know where we came from to know how to get to where we want to be. That's not to say that we can't change the story, right? I don't have to be afraid of affection. I don't have to always blow all my money. I don't have to be afraid of confrontation for forever. But if I'm going to get to a time and place where I'm not afraid of those things or where I'm not doing those behaviors that I don't like, I've got to get in touch with where the heck those behaviors came from in the first place, right? So that is my really long answer to why the 95% matters, why understanding your hardwiring matters, why understanding your story and where you came from matters. Because now, once I know where I came from, now I get to make the conscious decision to change. Now I'm in the driver's seat. Now I'm the one calling the shots. That, my friends, is the 3 random topics that have been in my mind lately. Simple versus easy. The fact that there is no balance. There's boundaries and there's priorities. And the fact that in order to change your story, you have to know what the heck your story is in the first place. I hope you were able to find at least a few nuggets of wisdom or a few nuggets of things to talk about in there. And as Mark would say if he was here, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. Go get it.
If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback, and it also helps other people find the show. As always, if you're looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewel Speaking and Training on all the major social networks. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.